What happens when a world-famous movie star sits down for a live talk show and nothing goes as planned? This was supposed to be normal. A routine interview. Cameras rolling, teleprompters flickering, a sunny studio stage with the laughter of a morning show audience. But for one electrifying moment, it wasn't normal. Not even close. The lights are bright, almost blinding, casting a harsh gleam over the pristine studio. Red on AIR signs burn like warning beacons. The audience is quiet, tense, caught somewhere between excitement and anticipation. Cameras swivel, operators' hands trembling ever so slightly as they follow every movement. Tom Cruise, impeccably dressed, sits on the edge of his chair. His posture is perfect, controlled, eyes focused, scanning, aware of every microphone, every lens. Joy Behar leans forward from her host chair, poised, smiling, but there's something in her eyes today. A spark, a mischief, or maybe a challenge. You can almost hear the room holding its breath. The producer, just off camera, whispers into an earpiece. A sound cue, a note, steady, keep it light. But something in the air suggests this show will not stay light for long. The camera pans the audience. Some are clutching their coffee cups, some whispering, but all senses are honed. Every pause, every blink, every movement seems amplified under the glare of live television. The silence is not empty. It is loaded, heavy with possibility. And then the first question drops. Joy Behar leans forward, her body language relaxed yet precise, the way a conductor might subtly cue an orchestra, knowing exactly when to introduce the first note of discord. She tilts her head slightly, a casual gesture, but in the bright glare of the studio lights, every tiny movement is amplified. The cameras, all 8 of them surrounding the stage, adjust minutely to capture every subtle expression. Tom Cruise sits opposite her, perfectly still, his posture impeccable. His hands are clasped lightly in front of him, knuckles turning almost imperceptibly white as his fingertips press together. He doesn't look nervous. He doesn't look angry. He looks like a predator patiently waiting for the moment to strike, not with violence, but with precision. His eyes, calm but intense, sweep the room, scanning every crew member, every camera lens, every audience member. He knows every angle is capturing him. Every movement is being dissected by millions, yet he remains immovable, controlled, a still center in a room that has begun to vibrate with silent tension. The audience is on edge, whispering softly among themselves, though they know better than to make noise. The on AIR red lights shine brightly overhead, almost blinding, turning the studio into a stage of interrogation rather than entertainment. The hum of the studio equipment is barely noticeable beneath the unspoken tension, but even that low mechanical noise seems louder, echoing in the charged atmosphere. The producer, just off camera, leans slightly into the frame of a monitor, whispering instructions into a headset, but there is nothing to be done now. The moment is already alive, and no cue card or script could steer it back to calm waters. Joy's smile is poised, perfectly timed, but there's a glint of challenge in her eyes. She tilts slightly forward, leaning into the invisible boundary between host and guest. Tom, she begins, her voice light, conversational, like the opening of an ordinary segment. Some people have been talking about your approach to certain roles. Do you ever feel like the pressure gets to you? The words hang in the air. They are casual, almost polite, but they are loaded. Loaded with implication, loaded with expectation. The room, for a brief moment, seems to stop breathing. Cameras zoom slightly closer. The red lights glow hotter, or at least seem to. The studio audience shifts. A few hands subconsciously tighten around coffee cups. A soft, collective inhale precedes the next moment. Even the air conditioning seems too loud, too intrusive, too mechanical in the tension-filled room. Tom repeats the word pressure in a low, controlled tone. It's not an echo of irritation. It's a question, precise, almost surgical. His voice cuts through the studio hum like a scalpel. The audience feels it immediately. They sense the gravity behind the calmness. He doesn't need to raise his voice. He doesn't need to lean forward or slam a hand on a table. The power is in the control, in the stillness, in the very slight tightening of his jaw. His knuckles whiten further, his lips press together. His eyes, a piercing blue under the harsh studio lights, fix on Joy with a steady, unwavering intensity. I think people sometimes misunderstand what dedication looks like. He says his tone calm, almost conversational, but with an undercurrent of authority. Every word is deliberate. Every pause is calculated. There's no anger in his voice, but there is undeniable force. The room seems to vibrate with it. The audience feels the tension in their chests. It's that rare moment when a person's presence alone commands absolute attention, when silence is louder than speech. Joy's smile remains, but it stiffens ever so slightly. She leans back, adjusting her posture minutely, perhaps sensing the first stirrings of something she did not anticipate. Her next words are carefully chosen, but there's a sharper edge to them, a subtle escalation. Well, there's also this rumor about how you respond when someone questions your methods. Care to clarify for our viewers? The words themselves are not aggressive, but in this charged atmosphere, they land like a pebble thrown into still water, rippling outward in tension. Tom's jaw tightens just fractionally. The room seems to contract. The audience, subconsciously holding their breath, watches the subtext, the invisible currents between the two figures. Cameras zoom in on micro expressions, the slight narrowing of Tom's eyes, the minuscule tilt of Joy's head, the subtle purse of her lips. Every twitch is magnified under the relentless gaze of live television. A pause follows. It is not long, but it is heavy, weighted with anticipation. Tom's lips move slightly, barely perceptible as he inhales. The studio lights reflect off his hair, making him glow almost ethereally, and yet there's a tension there, a magnetism, a gravity that seems to draw the entire audience's focus toward him. I don't respond to rumors. He says, each word measured, controlled. I respond to facts. It's calm, too calm. And that is what makes it thunderous. The audience exhales collectively, a subtle but palpable shift in energy. Camera operators exchange nearly imperceptible glances, one eye on the lens, one eye on the unfolding scene, silently acknowledging that they are witnessing something extraordinary. The producers lean forward, whispering in their headsets, their fingers tapping nervously on consoles, but the moment is beyond their control. Live television has no pause button, and the tension is now fully alive. Joy tilts her head, trying to maintain composure, but her next gesture betrays a flicker of uncertainty. She smiles again, this time a little tighter, a little more precise, as if measuring the space between words and body language, testing the boundaries of control. But the public has a right to know. She says, carefully enunciated, lightly pressed with authority. She leans forward, crossing an invisible line of engagement, the cameras catching the tension in her shoulders, the minuscule clench of her jaw. Tom's response is a lean forward, just barely, but enough to convey command without aggression. His voice remains measured, clipped, precise. You're asking questions for headlines, not understanding, he says. The words are calm, deliberate, but in the charged atmosphere, they hit like a shockwave. The audience gasps audibly this time, some instinctively clutching their coffee cups, some pressing hands to their mouths. The studio seems to shrink in response, the red lights blazing as if reflecting the intensity of the confrontation. Joy's next motion is subtle, almost imperceptible. She tilts her head, a minor readjustment of posture, a shift in weight, but in this hypersensitive space, it registers as a tactical retreat, a micro expression of recalibration. The audience is hanging on every detail, every gesture, every breath. The silence between words grows thicker, denser, like smoke filling a room. The crew whispers into headsets. The director's hand hovers over a button, but there is no intervention possible. The tension is organic, electric, unstoppable. Tom leans back just enough to reassert composure without losing control. His fingers remain intertwined, resting lightly on his knee. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't make a dramatic gesture. The room forgets to breathe again, caught in the stillness of his presence. Look, he says, voice steady, eyes never leaving Joy's. I came here to talk about my work, not to be ambushed for entertainment. Let's keep this professional. The words hang. The silence stretches. The audience exhales in unison. The lights seem sharper, more glaring, as if the tension itself has condensed into a tangible entity in the room. Cameras continue to pan, zoom, and focus, capturing every micro expression, every slight tremor of emotion. Joy's face betrays a flicker of surprise, a nearly imperceptible hesitation, as though even she recognizes the power of the moment she has just unleashed. The room, for a fleeting instant, feels like it has stopped existing outside this confrontation. The hum of the air conditioning, the soft shuffle of the audience, the subtle rustle of the crew, all of it disappears under the weight of the silent battle waged through controlled tone and micro-expression. The pause stretches just long enough for viewers at home to feel the atmosphere, to sense the live danger of an uncontrolled moment in the theater of live television. The first crack in the veneer of normalcy has appeared. It is subtle, nearly invisible, but undeniable. The rest of the interview will continue, but the studio, the audience, The cameras, they all know now that nothing will be quite the same. The line between calm professionalism and controlled confrontation is blurred, and the tension lingers like smoke, unbroken, unresolved, impossible to ignore. It is in this charged moment, in the silence, in the subtle shift of posture and gaze, that the audience, both in the studio and watching from afar, feels the electric thrill of live television at its most raw, most human, most unpredictable. The power is not in volume or theatrics, it is in the unspoken, in the micro moments, in the slow burn of tension that has gripped the room and refuses to let go. And as the cameras cut to a commercial break, the air remains thick with anticipation. Social media will explode within minutes. Clips will be shared, analyzed, and dissected frame by frame. But in the studio, in that brief, suspended moment, the first crack has fully formed, a fracture in live television that will resonate far beyond the walls of the studio, a subtle yet explosive moment of human drama captured in real time. The air in the studio is thick, charged with an almost electric anticipation. The audience sits frozen, their coffee cups resting untouched on laps, their fingers lightly tapping on the arms of chairs in nervous rhythm, as if any sudden movement might trigger the confrontation they are all secretly craving. Tom Cruise and Joy Behar sit opposite each other, two poles of controlled energy in a room that has forgotten how to breathe. The red ONAIR lights above them glow like a warning flare, reflecting sharply off the polished surfaces of the set. Cameras swivel subtly, operators straining to catch every micro expression, every imperceptible movement that could define the moment for history. Even the lights themselves, the harsh studio beams, seem to focus more intently, spotlighting the tension as if the very energy in the room has gravity. Joy Behar, ever poised, shifts slightly, the motion almost imperceptible, but enough for the cameras to pick up a small tilt of her head, a subtle raise of her eyebrows. She leans in, her tone conversational, casual almost, but the calculated cadence of her words betrays something sharper beneath the surface. Tom, she begins, her voice calm yet edged. I'm just asking questions that people want to know about. This is live, folks. Real talk. There's a lightness in her smile, but it doesn't reach her eyes. Her gaze is sharp, assessing like a chess player plotting moves several turns in advance. The audience shifts subtly in their seats, sensing the gravity behind what seems like a simple line. Cameras zoom in, capturing the tiniest detail, the faint glint of tension in Joy's eyes, the minuscule tightening of her jaw, the measured inflection of her words. Every gesture has weight. Tom Cruise remains still, a model of unshakable composure, yet the atmosphere trembles around him. His posture is impeccable, his hands lightly clasped. Resting on his knees, fingers interlaced, he leans forward just slightly, enough to draw the audience into his orbit, his piercing gaze never leaving Joy's face. The silence that follows is monumental, thick, almost suffocating. It's the kind of silence where the audience feels every heartbeat, every swallowed breath. Even the crew seems to slow, holding their own breath, knowing that in this pause, history is being made. You're asking questions for headlines, not understanding, Tom says finally, his voice controlled, precise, each syllable deliberate. He doesn't raise his voice, doesn't gesture wildly. The force of his words is in their calm authority, in the unflinching gaze that makes the room shrink around him. The audience gasps audibly this time, some instinctively pressing hands to their mouths, others leaning forward in their seats, hypnotized by the controlled tension. The studio lights seem brighter, sharper, highlighting every subtle twitch of muscles, every fleeting micro expression. Camera operators adjust instinctively, capturing every nuance. The way Tom's jaw tightens fractionally, the almost imperceptible shift of weight in Joy's chair, the tension in her hands as she rests them lightly on her knees. Joy's smile tightens, a deliberate mask for the realization that she has triggered something far larger than she anticipated. Her eyes flick briefly toward the crew, a silent acknowledgement of the studio's unspoken code. Live TV has no pause, no reset, no safe harbor. She leans back slightly, measuring the distance, recalibrating the balance of power. Her next words are careful, polite, but sharpened by subtle defiance. But the public has a right to know. The statement is simple, almost innocuous, yet the way it lands in the charged silence is seismic. The audience shuffles slightly, drawn into the tension as if physically pulled by it. Tom leans forward again, his gaze unwavering, eyes locked on hers with an intensity that seems to bend the very air between them. The public also has a right to respect. He replies, measured, low, authoritative. The words themselves are calm, but the weight behind them is palpable, pressing down on the studio like a tangible force. The audience is collectively frozen, some staring wide-eyed, some gripping the edges of their seats, all caught in the magnetic pull of this controlled confrontation. Cameras close in, capturing the minutiae, a flicker in the corner of Joy's eye. The slight tension in her neck muscles, the calm, unwavering precision in Tom's posture. The silence stretches. It is a silence that screams. The room forgets to breathe. Even the hum of studio equipment fades into insignificance, drowned out by the invisible pulse of tension radiating from the two figures at center stage. The crew whispers quietly into headsets, fingers tapping nervously on control panels, but there is nothing they can do to alter the moment. It is alive, organic, unstoppable. The conversation is not just between two people. It has become an electric current that courses through the audience, the crew, and through the cameras. Millions watching at home. Joy shifts slightly, crossing her legs, a subtle repositioning that suggests both defiance and calculation. She leans forward again, voice even, tone steady, but there's an underlying tremor of urgency she can't entirely mask. Tom, you've been known to be very protective of your work, but don't you think there's value in answering some of the harder questions? People want transparency. Her words are polite, professional, but the way she punctuates them, with slight pauses and calibrated inflection, carries a challenge. The audience reacts, small movements of leaning forward in unison, the collective holding of breath, anticipation crackling in the air. Tom tilts his head slightly, a micro expression almost imperceptible unless one watches closely. That conveys recognition of the challenge without conceding an inch of authority. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't smile. He simply breathes, the faintest movement, a subtle sign of composure, a signal to the audience and the crew alike. He controls this moment. Look, he says, finally measured, low, almost conversational in volume, but powerful in presence. I came here to talk about my work, not to be ambushed for entertainment. Let's keep this professional. The words are calm, but the pause that follows is thunderous. The room seems to hold its collective breath, as if every person present is suspended in time. Joy's lips part slightly, a flicker of surprise passing over her face, followed immediately by a controlled, polite smile. It is the smile of someone who realizes the dynamics have shifted, that the careful balance of the conversation has tilted. Her eyes narrow fractionally, but her tone remains steady, professional. I understand professionalism, she says. But people also care about what happens behind the scenes. Isn't that fair? The words are measured, probing like a delicate blade testing for vulnerability. Tom remains still unmoving, but the subtle shift in the set seems to mirror his intensity. He leans in slightly, gaze unwavering, voice calm but with an undeniable force. Fairness is important, but respect is paramount. That's where the line is drawn. The words are simple, but in the charged atmosphere, they carry the weight of an avalanche. The studio audience is silent, utterly captivated, sensing the gravity of the live moment, understanding without words that the balance has tipped irrevocably toward confrontation, even in the absence of raised voices or physical gestures. The tension stretches further as the cameras pan across the audience, capturing the small human reactions, a hand clasped to a mouth, a subtle widening of eyes, a tiny shiver of anticipation. Even the crew, behind the monitors, exchange barely perceptible glances. The director leans forward, fingers hovering over the console, but the moment is untouchable, uneditable, alive. Joy shifts again, hands clasped lightly, her posture still poised, but subtly less assured. She tilts her head, carefully measuring the next words, conscious of the cameras and the world watching beyond the studio walls. Tom, people admire your dedication. But sometimes admiration comes with curiosity. Isn't that natural? Her voice is soft now, almost conciliatory, but with an undercurrent of subtle insistence. The words hang, floating in the charged silence, each syllable amplified by the live audience and the glow of the red OAIR lights. Tom tilts his head in acknowledgement, almost imperceptibly, a signal of engagement without submission. He maintains his gaze, his calm intensity a magnetic force holding the room in a taut grip. Curiosity is natural, but intrusion is not, he replies, voice steady, deliberate, unwavering. The room seems to contract further around the statement. The audience leans forward again, The tension almost physically tangible. Every person in the studio feels the slow burn of confrontation that is controlled, precise, and utterly compelling. The silence stretches again, this time carrying the weight of anticipation, calculation, and unspoken challenge. Even the mechanical hum of the cameras and lights fades into the background, overtaken by the invisible energy in the room. The audience's reactions, subtle as they are, convey the collective understanding this is live television at its rawest, most human, most cinematic. Every small movement, every micro expression is a story unfolding, frame by frame, breath by breath. The exchange continues, subtle but electric. Joy's posture shifts, slightly leaning forward, her voice maintaining its calm exterior but betraying the tiniest edge of urgency. Tom, the audience wants to understand you, not just your work. Don't you think giving them insight is part of your responsibility? The words are polite, reasoned, yet in this charged atmosphere, they carry the weight of challenge. Tom remains composed, hands lightly resting on his knees, fingers interlaced. His gaze is unwavering, his calm presence a counterbalance to the probing tension. Insight without respect is exploitation. He replies, each word deliberate, precise. The silence that follows is suffocating. The audience holds its breath. The crew leans in. The cameras zoom in on every subtle movement, the slight narrowing of Joy's eyes, the imperceptible tilt of her head, the subtle tightening of Tom's jaw. The room seems to vibrate with anticipation, caught in the gravitational pull of controlled confrontation. Every small gesture, every subtle inflection is amplified, creating a moment that will be dissected endlessly on social media, in headlines, in late-night discussions. The tension has spiraled not into chaos, but into a masterclass of human interaction, subtle power, and live performance. Tom leans back slightly, maintaining control, his presence commanding unflinching. Joy adjusts her posture, recognizing the authority, acknowledging the shift in balance, yet continuing to probe, careful, calculated. The audience remains captivated, some gripping their chairs, some leaning forward, all caught in the hypnotic tension of live, unscripted, uneditable human drama. It is in these moments, small, subtle, calculated, that the live television spiral reaches its apex, the slow burn of conflict fully realized, the room suspended between control and challenge, authority and curiosity, professional restraint and human emotion. The cameras continue to roll, capturing every nuance, every micro expression, every breathless pause, creating a cinematic tapestry of tension that will echo far beyond the walls of the studio into the homes, feeds, and screens of millions. And as the final words of this segment echo, the room remains thick with unresolved energy, the tension lingering like smoke that refuses to dissipate, a live testament to the magnetic human drama of control, authority, and confrontation that defines the art of television when it is raw, real, and impossible to look away from. The cameras finally cut to a wide shot of the studio, capturing the subtle aftermath of a confrontation that was felt more than it was heard. The audience exhales collectively, some clapping out of reflex, others sitting frozen, still processing the intensity they just witnessed. Tom Cruise sits upright, composed but undeniably charged, the calm authority he carried throughout now leaving a lingering weight in the room. Joy Behar leans back slightly, her polished smile intact, but there is a flicker in her eyes, a recognition that the tension was bigger than either of them expected. For a few suspended seconds, time feels elastic. The hum of cameras, the red glow of the on-AIR, signs, even the subtle whispers of producers, all are drowned out by the echo of the confrontation itself. Neither side raised their voice, neither screamed, and yet the impact is undeniable. This was not a shouting match. This was a battle of presence, of authority, of human instinct meeting professional expectation under the unforgiving glare of live television. As the show attempts to move forward, the audience senses the irreversibility of what just happened. The segment continues, but the air has changed. Every laugh, every comment, every pause is now tinged with the memory of that slow burning tension. Social media erupts within minutes. Clips of the exchange flood feeds worldwide. Analysts dissect micro-expressions, headline writers exaggerate subtleties, and fans debate endlessly who was right, who crossed the line, who commanded respect, and who tested the limits of control. The truth is, there is no single answer, there is no clean resolution. There is no neatly wrapped ending where both sides shake hands and the audience exhales in relief. Instead, there is the lingering intensity of human confrontation caught in real time, the raw, cinematic energy of two powerful personalities, fully aware of the cameras, fully aware of the stakes, and fully aware that the world is watching. And that is the beauty of it. It is messy, unpredictable, and unforgettable. It reminds viewers that authority does not always come from volume, that control can be silent yet devastating, and that the simplest words delivered with measured precision can reverberate far longer than the loudest outburst. So the question remains for the audience: who truly held the power? Who should have stepped back? And who had every right to stand their ground? The answer is yours to decide. Watch the clips, dissect the moments, feel the tension, but remember, the cameras captured only what the world could see. The full story, the human story, lies in the unspoken pauses, the micro expressions, the controlled silences that made this moment unforgettable. If you were riveted by every subtle glance, every carefully measured word, and the raw energy of this live television confrontation, don't forget to comment below, share your thoughts, and subscribe to follow every explosive, unfiltered, cinematic moment the world can't look away from. Because in the end, this is live TV at its most human, most compelling, and most unforgettable. A confrontation that won't fade, because neither side will ever let it.